guys for tuning in to another episode of Overcoming Addiction. And first, I want to apologize. My studio is under reconstruction, so I had to work with what I have. But I wanted to bring you this video as soon as possible because I think it's very important. So come back and watch the video. Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Overcoming Addiction. Today, I want to talk about a problem that is still affecting us here in the U.S. Now, I did a video about this in January of this year, and it's about the fentanyl crisis. And the name of that video that I did in January is called Fentanyl is Not the Only Problem. So this video that I'm going to talk about today, the content of it is pretty much a follow-up to that video, where I'm going to add some additional facts that I have come across between then and now. Now, if you remember back in that video, I talked about how in 2018, the DEA determined that elements in China were the one responsible for the introduction to fentanyl in this country. So today I'm going to talk about how the United States created the conditions for the worst drug crisis in the history of our country. The synthetic drug fentanyl is the source of the worst overdose crisis in the history of our country. The United States has had an opioid problem since the 19th century. That would be the 1800s. It started in the early 1800s with opium and morphine that was being imported into this country from China. In fact, it was those immigrants that migrated from China to this country during the 1800s that began to bring opioids into this country. Later on, it began to be prescribed by doctors to relieve pain. And as a result of that, it became a very popular treatment for pain and other minor issues. Now it was because it was so popular to treat pain. It was decided that soldiers injured during the Civil War were to be administered these as medications to treat pain, such as maims and amputations. But as a result, many of them became addicted to opiates. So we had people that were addicted to opioids back during the Civil War era, particularly after the Civil War, which is, we all know, was middle to late 1800s. Now, continuing during the 19th century, or maybe a little bit later, doctors began prescribing morphine to women for things like headaches, menstrual pains, and a host of other little small issues. And between 60 and 70% of them became morphine addicts. Now I want to talk about the opioid connection to racism. During this same period of the Chinese immigrants that I talked about, many of them were demonized. Because of the opium epidemic in this country, they attributed to them. They were being accused of using opium to lure white women into becoming dependent on the drug, to the point where they might become sexually available to non-white men. The media sensationalized this idea, which sent white men into a racial frenzy. We see the same type of response today against people coming into this country through the southern border. And you see it in the news that many of those immigrants that are coming into the southern border, coming across into this country via the southern border, are accused of trafficking fentanyl. Actually, if you listen to the politicians, which I don't want to get into that really, all of the immigrants that are coming into this country are illegally bringing fentanyl into this country. We know that's not the case. Now let's talk about the introduction of heroin into this country. Starting around 1899, heroin was beginning to take the place of prescribed morphine. Doctors have started prescribing it because it was more powerful than morphine. Heroin was an opioid produced by a company in Germany. The name of the company was called Bayer and Bayer. Many of us, I don't know if it's still on the market, but many of us have taken Bayer aspirins before in our lifetime. That they are the same people that made heroin back in the early 20th century and shipped it to this country. Now, it stayed on the market until 1924, when the manufacturing and the possession of heroin was made illegal by Congress. But again, it came back again during World War II, when the government stockpiled all opiates to use on soldiers that were injured during combat in World War II. So apparently it was legal for the government to possess and distribute the drug. Now, not only were opioids distributed again to soldiers during World War II, they were also distributed during the Korean War in the 50s and the Vietnam conflict in the 60s. That means that almost all the soldiers who survived their injuries would become addicts. Now, during the war, it was difficult for exporters to distribute their drugs to the U.S. because of the trade sanctions against Germany at the time. Remember, we were at war with Germany in World War II. But after the war, we're going to see where all of this changes. Now I want to talk about a new generation of addicts and where they came from. After World War II ended, the sales in heroin erupted, and during the 60s and 70s, it's being smuggled in from European countries like Turkey and, of course, France. Now, many of us have seen the movie The French Connection, which pretty much portrays how all of that came about and how it was happening. Well, many of us older people. If you young people haven't seen the movie French Connection, go back and take a look at it. Now, it's being consumed by the younger generation of that time. No more is it just white men and white housewives who are the biggest consumers of heroin. It is the young hippies, the immigrants from Puerto Rico, and blacks who have immigrated from the South who are using opioids, or in particular heroin. Overdoses are beginning to rise, as well as overdose deaths. Now, it's during this period when newspapers are flooding readers with horror stories of overdoses and crime among those groups that I mentioned, those minority groups, when the government begins to impose harsh penalties for drug users. It's interesting that the users were receiving harsher penalties than the distributors. This brings us to the birth of the fentanyl epidemic. In the early 80s, pharmaceutical companies were producing drugs like Percocet, oxycodone, Adderall, and Xanax for pain relief. Now, all of these drugs contain a small amount of opioids or opiates, which, if taken as prescribed, were deemed to be safe. Unfortunately, many abused these drugs and found themselves addicted to opioids. So when they were no longer able to obtain prescriptions, they turned to the streets to purchase the drugs illegally, either through pills or by just buying heroin. Now, when the government initiated a crackdown on the prescription use of these drugs, the Mexican cartels, who were already smuggling raw heroin and cocaine into this country, saw an opportunity to increase their profits by producing a synthetic drug to fulfill the growing U.S. demand for opioids. According to the DEA, since 2021, fentanyl has claimed more than 200,000 lives. There are many layers to this crisis. But looking over the history of this country, it appears that first the government and then the big pharmaceutical companies have played a huge role in the fentanyl crisis of today. Mexico did not initiate the opioid addiction in this country. They're just one of the latest to profit off of it. As I said before, it was China that was making big profits off of this product coming into America until the Chinese government cracked down on the precursors to make these drugs, which the Chinese were shipping to other countries. And if you go back and look at a DEA report in my last video about fentanyl not being the only problem, you see that in 2018, China started shifting their production into India. So fentanyl is coming into this country from everywhere. And unfortunately, this crisis is not going away. We can't stop the illegal flow of drugs into this country unless we have better border security. Again, I'm not going to get into the politics of that because we see it every day. And then there are those who are entering this country legally carrying illegal drugs. So it's not just a southern border issue, as I said before. And as long as there is a demand, there will be a supplier. Now, what we can do is apply all means to help those who are and will become infected or affected by this deadly drug. Thank you all for watching this, and I hope you take the time to go and do some more background research on the topic that I just shared. As I said, it was a condensed version of all the facts that I had gathered about this. I'm going to add some additional information, including those additional facts, in another video. But in the meantime, I would like for you to take a moment and go online and purchase my books. The first one is The Effective Use of Spiritual Tools, and the second one is Pressures of Addiction, Finding a Way Out. Go online to Barnes & Nobles, Amazon, and there are some other online platforms. Also, you can email me at this address here, and I can send you a signed copy. I'll be more than happy to do so. Please start the conversation among your friends and family about this deadly issue. It's probably the only way we'll bring more attention to it and hopefully begin to come up with a solution. This problem is going to take a very long time to begin to start correcting. Also, you can contact me on Facebook under my name, Sandy Mays, and on Instagram under SRM_author. If you have any comments about any of the contents that I do, leave a comment in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video. I hope to see you all again in the next one, and until then, I'll see you guys soon.